Hola, amigas, amigos, bienvenidos a Cómics XXI. Yo soy Marcos Ordóñez e iniciamos ahora un nuevo capítulo, el tercero, de la historia de EC Comics. Bueno, aquí tenéis la edición española que hace pocos años, comenzó Diablo Ediciones, una edición espléndida, lujosa, bien hecha. Bueno, un poco la edición que faltaba de los cómics de EC. Y lo que os quiero contar ahora es una cosa curiosa de cómo trabajaban allí en EC, porque crearon un método que se llamó el método EC. Vamos a verlo. William Gaines y Al Feldstein creaban las historias y directamente preparaban las páginas, y en las páginas vacías ponían los huecos para los cartuchos de texto y para los bocadillos. De esa manera, el dibujante se encontraba, cuando empezaba a realizar el trabajo, con la rotulación ya colocada en su sitio y ya con el espacio reservado que quedaba para que ellos dibujaran.
In the mid-1980s, the Cochrane reprints caught the attention of several Hollywood producers, including Joel Silver, who had produced such hits as Lethal Weapon and Die Hard.
I remember as a kid, I would devour these comic books. I mean, they were scary, they were funny, they were just so special. There was nothing else like them. So we pursued Bill Gaines, and we said we'd like to get the rights to Tales from the Crypt.
Silver, together with partners David Giler and Walter Hill, optioned the rights with the idea of producing an anthology film. Directors Richard Donner and Robert Zemeckis eventually became partners in the project. In the late 1980s, the group abandoned the idea of a feature film and decided to turn Tales from the Crypt into a television series. The pilot episode, directed by Robert Zemeckis, was based on a story in which a homicidal maniac dressed as Santa Claus, terrorizes a woman who has just killed her husband. During production, Silver and Zemeckis sought advice from Bill Gaines.
When we showed the rough cut to Bill, he said at the end of the show, she should be screaming her head off.
Oh, Carrie, thank goodness.
See, Mommy? I told you Santa would come, and he didn't even have to come down the chimney. I let him in.
No! No! Ah! No!
Naughty or nice?
He was absolutely involved in the creation of the first episode. And we always looked at that episode as a template for all future episodes.
The series producers, all fans of the comic books, remained faithful to the EC spirit.
If you read the stories in the comic book and then you see our versions of the stories, they're very true to them. I mean, we really didn't take a lot of liberties, and we tried to kind of capture, you know, the images from the comic book and use those images almost like a storyboard for the shows.
The series also brought to life Gaines and Feldstein's horror host, the Crypt Keeper.
We all felt it was very important that the Crypt Keeper be a part of the show, because we loved the notion of this little weird guy who was funny and scary. You know, he could make you laugh, but he could kill you.
Although he bore little physical resemblance to his comic book counterpart, the animatronic Crypt Keeper did speak in the same punning patter.
Greetings, infestors. I'll be with you in a moment. I was just putting these gross profits away for safekeeping. You see, boils and ghouls, at Crypt Keeper Financial, we can help you get morgue for your money. Whether it's mutual fiends you want, or cold, horrid cash, we can guarantee you'll coroner the market.
The key to the Crypt Keeper is that he's comedy relief. He sometimes can get a little ghoulish, but never really over the top. He's there to ease the pain of being scared, perhaps.
Jack Wall is the president of Tales from the Crypt Productions and is the marketing mastermind behind the flood of Crypt Keeper merchandise.
But I said there's no reason in the world that the Crypt Keeper can't be, for Halloween, what Santa Claus is for Christmas. That was a tall order. We're gaining on it. He is slowly but surely becoming what I like to call the world's undisputed icon of ghoul horror and spooktacular fun.
It was just exciting that we were able to create this kind of whole, world out of these very secret, special, magical comic books.
Once banished by parents and politicians, Tales from the Crypt and the other EC horror comics of the 1950s have taken on the air of legitimacy and earned their rightful place as a piece of treasured Americana.
What's amazing is how much the EC books are remembered. There were hundreds and hundreds of comic books coming out every month in the 50s that no one remembers, that no one collects, that no one bases current fiction on inspirations of. And yet these EC books seem to have crept into the sensibilities of a whole generation or two.
Al Feldstein is considered to be one of the most talented writers and editors ever to work in comic books. He retired from Mad Magazine in 1984 and now lives on a ranch in Montana, where he paints wildlife scenes and recreations of his famous horror and science fiction covers.
I consider myself a very fortunate human being in having had a career that I loved, that I enjoyed doing, and fortunate that I had the opportunities presented to me by Bill and his open creative publishing. He had a great capacity for letting people with talent shine, and for that I'm eternally grateful.
William M. Gaines died in 1992. To the general public, he is perhaps best remembered as the colorful and iconoclastic publisher of Mad. But to fans around the world, he is considered the heart and soul of the company that forever changed the face of comic books.
He was absolutely thrilled with the support from EC fans. He came into the business not knowing anything about the comic book industry, and he just did what he liked. And he was amazed to find that everyone else liked it too.
Like her father before her, Wendy Gaines Bucci has taken over the family business and has become the guardian of the EC legacy.
When I was younger, EC didn't really mean a whole lot to me. I just knew it was something that my dad had done at one time. And as I grew older and started to become familiar with the material and read the old comic books, I realized he was a genius and I never knew it. He was way ahead of his time and created something that he was very proud of and we were all very proud of as well.
Your name, please? Estes Kefauver. And your age? Paul, I really might be inclined to plead the immunity of the Fifth Amendment on my age, but I guess it's all right. I'm 51 now.
And your occupation, sir?
I'm a politician, a member of the United States Senate.
Senator Kefauver, what have you learned so far in your investigation on the subject of comic books?
Paul, we had an extensive hearing in New York some months back, and we've had other hearings in other parts of the country. I was amazed to find the number of comic books being published each month in the United States. We found about 100 million. Of these 100 million going out, approximately 80 million are all right. They're funny, entertaining. Some of them are educational. But about 20 million were of the horror and crime type in which we are particularly interested. And this comic book business is really big business.
Well, what about the effect of these comic books on the children?
All of our testimony from psychiatrists and children themselves show that it's very upsetting, that it has a bad moral effect, and that it is directly responsible for a substantial amount of juvenile delinquency and child crime.
Are there presently comic books in publication that you feel are harmful to children?
Yes, there are still some, although not as many as there used to be. The industry, you know, has appointed a czar. They have a code. Mr. Murphy is in charge of the code operation. They submit their comic books to him, and he passes on them. They are now not supposed to show crime and horror in their comics.
Do you feel that legislation to control this type of comic book, this harmful comic book, is indicated?
Yes, I think some legislation would be helpful. Legislation regulating, tightening up the mail statutes, and regulation breaking up the tie-in sales. But I'm not in favor of a so-called censor legislation outlawing comics altogether.
Well, what do you think are the dangers to our constitutional rights in this type of legislation, Senator?
I think the dangers are that if you start censoring comic books, it might lead on to censoring other things, and it might encroach upon our constitutional freedom of the press. And after all, Paul, the only way that you can really stop this kind of thing is to arouse public opinion. If the people in a section decide they don't want these horror and crime comic books sold, read by their children, if they will become adamant and vigorous about it, they will just not be sold in that section. That is the best guarantee. And Paul, that's why I'm so happy that you're doing this production confidential file, arousing public opinion in this whole field of juvenile delinquency, apathy, the lack of interest on the part of the people at the local community is the biggest enemy that we have.
In comic books right out of high school, and I wasn't interested in going to college to take up a trade or anything like that as the family would like, and I always wanted to be an artist. And I'd heard going to art school. I went to the Art Students League in New York, and there were a number of young fellows a little older than I who were already doing comic book work in the way of doing inking, backgrounds, runners, all these menial jobs. And they gave me a few addresses, you know. And so I made up what I thought was a sample of what I could do. And I went to one of the, what I think is one of the pioneer studios. It was called Harry Chesler. He was on 14th Street. Oh no, yes, 14th Street in Manhattan. And I showed him the samples, and he hired me. Right, you know, right off the bat, at the enormous salary of $15 a week. And that's how I got started. And I was doing backgrounds. Then, after about a year or two of that, being an upstart, pretty much, I decided that I wanted to do figure work and do my own stories. And so I made up another sample, and I showed it to the boss. And he says, well, he says, you're not ready yet. But I fooled him. I went out to Fawcett Publications at that time, who had dropped a lot of their paperbacks and pulp magazines, and went up to one of the art editors over there and showed him my work. He was willing to give me a story, and I was 17, about 18 years old at the time. I went back to Harry, and I said, well, I said, I'll be with you another week, and then I'm going to leave. He says, oh, no, you're not. I'll give you a feature. I'll let you do what you want. So I knowing the place, I stayed with Harry Chesler. And then it was continually up. And then another studio offered me a higher price, so I went with him. That was Jerry Auge at the time. His partner at the time was Will Eisner. And Eisner had left to start his own shop. Jerry Auge needed artists, and so he was very glad to hire me. And I stayed with them up until induction time, when I went into the service for 4 years. When I came out, I went back to the Auge Studios, and his main account there was Fiction House. And there I did covers, and I did a character, I forget what his name was, but the story was Ghost Gallery. Murdoch, that was the main character's name for continuity. And I did those. And then, of course, well, I'm cutting this very short, the romance era came in, and being noted as a good girl artist, I had a lot of work because I could draw, you know, pretty women, things like that. And then I decided I was going to go straight freelance. And so I began to go to all the different publishers, and I was getting work from a bunch of them. And finally, I landed up with Bill Gaines through my friend Al Feldstein, who was, well, as you know, later became the editor of Mad Magazine with the Gaines Enterprises. And he took me in because they had switched from all the little types of funny cartoon books that they were doing to romance. When they switched to horror and crime, I naturally went along with that. And for a couple of years, we did the horror and crime stories. Basically, the plot was always, as Bill used to say, Jack Kamen would draw a nice family scene, and the father would always be very nice, and the story would wind up where the wife kills him. So I mean, this is that's the type of thing I did. At the time, for a young man, it was good pay. You have to remember that I started out at a time when $55 was a good salary. I mean, men were supporting families on it, and I got up to $90 a week. So I thought comics were going to be my thing. Al Feldstein and I, our families developed a deep friendship, and what he used to do in progress, he would bring a script home to his, to his home, and I'd come down and see him. We were maybe 2-3 miles apart down the road. We'd discuss that, then I would do the pencils. I'd bring it back. When I were done with those, by that time he'd have another script for me. He would take the pencils to the office next morning, have them lettered while I was penciling another story. So I very rarely had to go into New York. In fact, I only knew the other artists as, I heard about them pretty much. Not, I wasn't in with the crowd. And I say that was our relationship for many years. It saved me time, and it was nice and comfortable. I didn't have to ride the railroad because we lived in Rockville Center. It was close to a half hour into the city. I mean, it was perfect. So that's about all I can tell you about. I mean, and knowing Bill socially, whatever, there would be an occasional dinner party, and we socialized that way. I think it was a joint effort between Bill and Al. I don't know how much Bill and I don't know how much Al, but they always had a great time when I came in, being jolly and everything. They said, oh, we'd love to get this guy to do some torture stuff, And so Al said, look, she says, I think I can write a story about this thing. She says, we'll call it Kamen's Calamity. And Al wrote the story. That's how that came to be. And they had a great time with it. particularly when they had as the men were coming into the office, they would add they had the page. I finished the story, and they had the page, and it was scheduled, so every time they delivered, they could do that one panel. You know, so Johnny Craig would do one, and Jack Davis would do one, Graham Ingalls would do one, and then it went off to the printer. Actually, coming back to the fact that the stories were written for me, you know, to suit my format, I enjoyed all of them. Because, you know, as I say, they were tailored to, Bill and Al would get together and tailor a particular story, and they would tailor it for my abilities. And invariably, it was always it would have a domestic flavor. I'm trying to remember the movie that they modeled it on all the time, where the waitress wants to kill her husband who owns the diner.
Postman always rings twice?
Right,
okay.
That one. Stories like that, that's what they'd write for me, you know. And immediately, that type of movie, whatever, which became popular at the time, would jump into my mind, and this is exactly what I would illustrate. So it was very handy. I mean, particularly when the stories are written for you. I think all of us felt that way, because when it came to the particular scripts going to particular artists, they were all written for what they would do. Ingalls got all the gloomy stuff to do. Bernie Krigstein got things where he could animate. Figure. He had a great way of taking a panel and then have a single figure and have it just like a set of stop action, which was his favorite way of doing it. Johnny Craig wrote his own. He called me in, and this is when he was contemplating. I don't know whether he told this to the other boys or not. He says, and it's true. He said he had 3 months of the amount of money to pay everybody. He says, and I don't think past that, he says, I don't think I'll be able to carry the company anymore. So he suggested that I go look for other work. And paid us regularly. You know, we did the stories. They never saw the light of day or even a printing press. And that's when I took off. If he said this to anybody else, I don't know, but to me, he did. He says, Jack, he says, I can pay you for 3 months. He says, but then after that, he says, all the money's gone. Absolutely tremendous. Absolutely tremendous. Very, very generous. I mean, we have these, you probably heard about them too, about the Christmas parties in July. He found out what our hobbies were, what other things we did. And one of the last gifts I got one of these Christmas parties was I already had these new babies of mine that arrived, the twins, and there was a camera, film, a screen, everything go to make home movies. You know, that was my July Christmas present. An unbelievable man, unbelievable boss, very, very, very sympathetic. You know. Either he liked you or he didn't know you, you know, that was it. And everybody loved him. Everybody loved him. His son, who's has kind of a fame in his own right. He is a very important man in the United States. Has a running deal going pretty much with Sotheby's. Sotheby's keeps getting these originals come floating in from everywhere. And he's buying them. He has the largest collection of original art of mine anywhere. I mean, as soon as it surfaces somewhere, he has somebody buy it.
Brother started working in comics, and he was doing various companies, and then he heard of EC, and he liked it there, and he was doing, I guess, the bulk of his work there for a while. And they got dissatisfied with the coloring that was being provided by the company that printed the plates for as most comic book outfits had their plates printed at this company, Chemical Color in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And they would send the artwork up there, and they would send back what they called silver prints and for me to color. But before then, they would do the coloring on a lot of the early Crime Patrol and the Love books and the cowboy books that they did before I was around. And when Harvey came, he was very interested in having accuracy and more artsy coloring, and so was Al for his horror books. They were beginning to take off, and they wanted to have a good quality of everything, and they had good quality stories, they had good quality pencil inking, so forth, and design. And so my brother said, oh, you're unhappy. I bet my sister could do that stuff. She's coming along. So it wasn't really nepotism, because they would have fired me at the drop of a hat if I wasn't any good. But because my whole family was artistic, I could handle it. And I knew what they wanted, and I was starting out, so I was very interested in doing a good job. And then I got the whole line to color. Isn't that nice? No, it was the subject matter was fun to work with, really. And I learned a lot. And Harvey, the first story I did, I remember my brother came home and he says, Harvey liked your stuff. He says, you're the first person that didn't color the moon yellow. And I said, what moon? I don't even remember the moon in the story, but you know, the moon to me, and only on special times is there a yellow moon. But you use the color, you use the white of the paper, as awful as the paper was in those days, as a color white. So that's what I did. But there was little things like that that I was a little more thoughtful. And evaluating the depths of pictures, because I had a somewhat artistic training. And I did go to cartoonist and illustrator school for a short time, but most of my schooling was from my father and my brother, of course. Okay. My brother could draw too, but it was mostly my dad with the painting and so forth. Well, when I first met him, good vibes. Good vibes. And of course, he didn't have the big beard or anything. He was just a guy, you know, a little heavy set. And they were very polite, you know, tie and shirt guys. You know, maybe them rolled up once in a while. But in those days, in the 50s, men dressed, and women, you went to work with heels on. That's why most of us turned out with bad feet if we continued working. But yeah, it was a regular business office. You could have been downtown or uptown or anywhere. It was just an office, and nobody looked slobby or anything. I'm not saying they look slobby today, but you know what I mean. Nobody came in short, ripped off dungarees, or it wasn't the style. The only one that was very, very casual was Williamson, because he was out playing ball with Frazetta and Torres and all his other friends, you know, and he'd come in, you know, they'd come in with the bat, you know, and come in, I'm going to do this, you know, and they were the kids, so.
Okay.
Yeah, and Bill was always cordial and very polite, and you just got the idea that he was the boss, but he didn't project like, don't fool around with me, you know. It wasn't like that. He wasn't officious. He was very easygoing, nice, and he told you what he wanted, you know. But there was a freedom there, as Al spoke of at the convention the other day, that Al gave a lot of freedom to his artists and stuff. And so did Harvey to a great extent, but Harvey would do layouts on the stories, so he had more, but he was more artsy-fartsy in his stuff, his art, and even his war stuff, he wanted exactly the way, accurate and everything, while Al's was more fantasy orientated, science fiction, and horror can be. You can have a wonderful, terrible, horrible murder in a mansion in the 1890s or right on 42nd Street. So, you know, you can do it any way you want. Not that you would change the story, but I'm saying he wouldn't tie you down to accuracy. Like it would have to be a 1953 New York City cab in the story. You know, you could fool around. Okay, yeah, I suppose so. I felt very comfortable with them. I thought they were my friends, pals. I could ask them, I could ask questions of my boss. I could ask Feldstein and Harvey or Bill. I don't understand this, and you didn't feel like you were charging and interrupting anything, or that you were taking their time. They were really generous in explaining. I learned a lot, and I learned a work ethic. Not only was my family that way, orientated that way, they were a bit old-fashioned, but which was good, I think, but the office was too. And Al Feldstein, he never wasted a minute, and yet you could stop and say, Al, how do I scale something down? I don't know how to do this. And he'd say, okay, Marina, you should know that already, you know. And, no, all right. And with Bill too, you could, I didn't know, or I'm sorry, or you know, something. But they were fun to be with. Harvey was a delight. He was a delight when he would be talking about it, telling you a cartoon or a joke or telling what he's going to do in a story. He would suddenly turn from this gnome-type figure, a little serious, into this elf. And he'd be dancing around. They were funny. It reminded me later on, Stan Lee would do that, and he wouldn't be cutesy humor stuff, but Stan would jump on top of desks and stuff to tell you a story. Later on, he didn't do that. He was too busy when the books really took off at Marvel. But Harvey was like that. He would act out these things, and he looked like his drawings. He looked like them, and you were just charmed by the whole thing. You couldn't help but like him, even if he was so autocratic with when he wanted the work done. You didn't mind, because you knew deep down he was just as nutty as you were, you know. So that was one aspect. Al was great to work with, too. I really enjoyed him. You know, they say I'm the censor, and that really, I would never blot out artwork, but I was afraid with some of them when they'd have someone, well, I don't know whether it would be a case of disembowelment, but it would be pretty disgusting if you colored the gunk coming out of somebody. And so I would color blue, or if somebody's head was, you know, the brains falling out, well, you know, you color it blue. And somebody said later it probably saved us from even more blasting because people didn't notice it as much. But the kids did. They knew what was under there. And I didn't color anything to obliterate, just to tone it down a little, that when Mom found the comic, she didn't see the eyeball hanging out or something, you know. And, you know, and there was tongue-in-cheek with the kids. It was the grim fairy tales, you know. And it was thrilling, because everybody was beginning to be a little stiff, you know, in those days, in the 50s. And EC was loose. So that was good. Graham Engels, for instance, would color a cover, and sometimes his watercolors were so too intricate or too detailed or too refined for the interpretation of the primitive coloring we had then. We didn't have computers. They had to do this all on metal and moires up there, you know, and it took a long time, and we didn't have that much time. And they couldn't spend, they could only charge a certain amount of money, I suppose. It was a 10-cent book. And sometimes I'd have to recolor those. For the most part, all the insides, and for the most part, I would say at least 3/4 of all the covers from that period on. Maybe more, I don't know, but it doesn't matter. They all look good. It drive me absolutely crazy, but because from page to page, he would color, like you'd have a bandolier or a button or a scarf on a guy, and the next page, the scarf is gone, the bandolier's running this way, and the belt buckle's over here, there's a round on one page. But the end result, well, what I ended up doing, I'd read the whole story twice and make sure, this, and this, that's not there, So I wouldn't color them a glaring color the first time. I'd color them all brown, so that if he shifted where they were, because they didn't edit that much, they didn't care with it. Harvey did, but on the science fiction and on the historical and horror books, the guy could have the pattern on his tie or not, you know, if nobody bothered mixing it up. But the favorite, Woody was very satisfying because his inking was so sexy-like. He had shadows and glitzy and, you know, lovely-looking whoopie-doo ladies, you know. And you'd work a little harder on it, but it came out glitzy. Even in those primitive, what you had the tools to work with, it came out looking really glitzy. And the kids, I think he was one of the fan favorites. Davis was very easy to color, very much like the Jack Kirby that I colored many years later, because his blacks were so powerful. You could hardly ruin the story, but you could aid the mood of it by bringing things forward and back. But because the blacks were so strong, you had to be a moron to do it wrong. Woody was great. Davis was very easy. Severin was good, but naturally he was good. He's my brother. And I had to be accurate with him because all his stuff was accurate. But it was fun to color because it was like coloring I'm not as good as he is, but we are similar in our techniques. So I enjoyed that a lot. Graham Engels, really a riot because I'd be chuckling as I was doing the stuff. It was so hideous, you know. Very moody if you felt. What I liked about it was what the readers, I think, liked. That in a book you got 4 different artists in some cases. And it was all different moods, so you never got bored coloring. It was all the different stories, 6 pages of this, 6 pages of history. Orlando was good to color. Williamson, science fiction, and Kriegstein, he too. You wanted to do it science fiction-y, but I hadn't seen that much of it. But what we were striving for is what the Star Wars people got later on. That was what we knew, what we wanted to see in space, you know, and the imagination was there. Inking was very good on the science fiction artist, and Williamson was fun to color, but it was hard sometimes because he put so much work in it and you didn't want to obliterate. One splash page he had on a jungle scene on a foreign planet, on a heavenly place. Trees and vines and blah, 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 and then of course the bingo shiny spaceship. And this jungle scene was so gorgeous that I thought, if I put colors on this crappy paper that we have, and the printing is so primitive, if it's off register, I colored the whole thing in pale yellow so you could see all the inking work. And everybody thought, oh, you colored the whole splash in practically all yellow except the spaceship. And I said, yeah, but you can see it, you see, and that's why they liked the thoughtfulness of it. The writers try to help the story, the artists did, and last, little old me, I saw fortunately for me too, I saw the quality of what I was working with and tried to add to it by not overdoing anything, you know. Did I cover all the artists? I didn't mind any of them, but Woody was hard because I had to follow up what he was doing, you know, and Williamson, sometimes you had to be very careful not to obliterate anything because he had all this diddly-do going on. But they were all fun to color because of the variety, you know. I could color Davis's the fastest for some reason. Oh, and Johnny Craig, his stuff. And now here's Mr. Neat, Mr. Clean. His stuff, it was so, and Kamen too, nice clean stuff that when it got horrible, that was fun too, because sometimes that was difficult because they draw it and almost looked like advertising art. You know, and the next guy come along would be Graham Engels, where everybody was wearing, you know, smelly wool and old 4,000-year-old satin, you know. Well, Mr. Fifth Avenue, Johnny Craig, you know, his stuff was neat and clean until he was chopping up his wife. So, the kids loved it.